Well, hi everyone, and it is August 23rd. Quick little vlog here for you today. The other day I talked about the concept of linearity, and I tried to use the blackboard to describe how a number of our patient-reported outcomes, or probably even our clinical outcomes that we use, are not necessarily linear. That they're probably more sensitive to change at the extreme ends than they are in the middle, which causes a little bit of problem sometimes when trying to translate these things clinically. But I think maybe once you understand this as a clinician, you can figure out that it's not too hard to apply and interpret your change scores maybe a little bit more accurately. I wanted to give you another example of just sort of caution as far as assuming linearity in human conditions go. And so I've got a couple of graphs up here, just some analyses of a pilot study we just recently ran. I just wanted to quickly go over these. The context here of this study is this is looking at indicators of exam stress in our MPT students just before they get into their practical exams. The concept of practical exam stress is not something that's been widely investigated, but for anyone who's ever been through a physio program, or frankly any healthcare professional program, there's a lot of practical exam. A lot of your mark is based on your practical or your observational exams. So myself and a fourth-year honors student last year named Nancy Zhang set out to try and identify different indicators of exam stress, and then sort out maybe whether or not those may have influenced exam performance, or marks in other words. With the goal being here that if we can identify important indicators or start to look at some mechanisms for exam stress, we may be able to intervene. One part of this study was a qualitative study, and I'm not talking about that here today, where we asked the students to indicate their primary sources of exam stress, and that's actually been quite fascinating. We've got those results analyzed, and I'll share those with you at another time. But just continuing on with our theme of linearity, I wanted to quickly show this to you. One of the things we did in this study is we had the students come into our lab when they were not involved in exams, so not an exam period, and they just sort of chilled out in the lab, listened to some quiet music for about 20 minutes in a fairly dimly lit room, and then we got some saliva from them, and from that we could get their salivary cortisol levels. Cortisol, as many of you will know, is a primary stress hormone. We then got the same salivary samples from them literally 10 minutes before they walked into the practical exam. So we were able to sort of get what their baseline was during a chilled out period, and then what their sort of immediately pre-exam, and then actually we got it again post-exam cortisol levels were. And at the same time we captured a number of self-reported indicators of anxiety and stress, as well as their beliefs in their performance and all that sort of thing. During baseline we also captured a couple of different sort of personality characteristics that we thought might be associated with stress, and these were intolerance for uncertainty and perfectionistic tendencies. So anyway, we just got the cortisol results back last week, and I've just been sort of running through those, and I just wanted to quickly share them because I thought it kind of fit well with what we were talking about as far as the potential dangers of assuming linearity. So what I've done here is I've gone through, now there's only 17 subjects, so let's not oversell this, okay? But I've gone through and I've broken the sample up into people who essentially flatlined in their cortisol levels, so we really didn't see much of a change from baseline to the pre-exam period. There's another group over on the other end that showed us a real dramatic change, in some people 300% increase in their cortisol levels from baseline to the pre-exam period. And right now I've got 4 people in each of those groups. So again, this is not a large sample, let's not oversell this. And then the rest of the sample, the sort of middle 50%, are those who showed a bit of a moderate change, the kind of change that we think we would expect to see. And basically what I've got here on the screen are plots of a couple of different indicators that we captured, and I think it's sort of interesting. So if I move over here and we look at this first one, this is scores on the Intolerance for Uncertainty Questionnaire. So I have a belief that the physio profession in general tends to be a little bit intolerant of uncertainty. We sort of like clear, concrete answers, which can be a bit problematic, especially maybe even referring more to students as they're coming into our programs, because they've come from often hardcore science backgrounds where they managed to achieve high academically because they were good at memorizing answers and sort of providing the correct answers when it counted most. But then they get into physio and recognize that in physio there are very few right or wrong answers. We live in a gray area, of course. I mean, we're dealing with humans. And so I think that can be a bit of a difficult transition. Some students I see do well with that transition over the course of the program, others don't. And in fact, others I see sometimes years later and are still sort of seeking that, that perfect professional development opportunity that's going to give them the right or wrong answer. Anyway, nonetheless, so what we've got here is on this side we've got mean of the Intolerance for Uncertainty Questionnaire. And what we can see is that here's the group of folks who showed no sort of cortisol reactivity. And they were actually scored the highest on our Intolerance for Uncertainty Questionnaire. So in fact, if anything, they were the most intolerant of uncertainty. Over here is our group who showed the largest change in their cortisol levels from baseline to pre-exam. And they also showed a reasonably high mean intolerance for uncertainty. Whereas our group who sort of, they were a little bit stressed. I wouldn't say they were flat, but I also wouldn't say they were sort of overdoing it, I guess you could say, or overstressed. They were in fact lowest also on their Intolerance for Uncertainty Questionnaire. Now you'll notice that I'm not showing any error bars on here. I'm not trying to make any comments around statistical significance. None of these are statistically significant with the exception of one, and I'll comment on that when I get there. This one over here to the right is just one of the subscales we can pull out from the Intolerance for Uncertainty Questionnaire. This has to do with being able to function while you are uncertain. And what we can see here is, again, the people who were either flat or who had a dramatic increase in their cortisol tended to rate higher on these beliefs that they had a hard time acting when they were uncertain of what the right answer was. Whereas, again, our moderate change folks scored at least lower on that scale. Going down, what I've got here, and again, I haven't tried to format these graphs in any way. I've just copied and pasted them from SPSS right now. But what we have here is, this is the State Trait Anxiety Inventory, STAI. We captured just the state version of that immediately before the students went into the exam. So we wanted to get sort of just how anxious are you feeling right now. And what you can see here again is those who were either very flat in their cortisol reactivity or those who had a fairly exaggerated cortisol reactivity tended to rate higher on their current sense of anxiety just before going into the exam than did our moderate folks. We asked them how prepared they felt for the exam that day. Our moderate folks, those who showed at least some increase but not a dramatic increase, also rated themselves as the most prepared. Now again, if you look at the scale on the side, these are not, this is not a dramatic difference. But anyway, the trend is sort of what I'm trying to point out right now. As far as we asked them about their belief in their performance, how well do you think you did? This was after they came out of the exam. Again, our folks who showed a moderate level of increase in their cortisol levels also stated that they felt they did the best. We asked about their anxiety levels after coming out of the exam. So this, in this case, was time 3. So they just come out of the exam on the other end. And once again, our moderate folks here are rating the lowest levels of state anxiety at that time. And then I suppose sort of the thing that students might be most interested in, what about influence on marks or grades? Now, a caveat here, one of the things we recognized, and this is the value of doing a pilot study, is that for this particular exam, this was an orthopedics type of exam where the goal was to teach a patient an exercise or conduct some kind of orthopedic exam on a mock patient, which tended to be their friend or classmate. Anyway, one of the issues here with these types of exams is that these students are far too homogeneous a group. They practice together, they study together, many times they live together. I wouldn't be surprised if they shower together. I mean, they seem to do everything together, these students, and as a result, they all perform very similarly on these exams. And so we ran into an issue with variance or variability in our grade spread. So we had a very tight spread of grades, which for anyone who's ever tried to run a correlation knows that it's hard to get a good correlation when you've got a very tight dependent variable. But nonetheless, again, this is just a trend. This is not by any means definitive, but at the end of the day, it seems as though a little bit of stress is probably good. Not enough or too much were, at least let's say, associated with, and again, not significantly in this case, but with overall lower marks. So the difference between the sort of flat and moderate group was about half a mark, give or take, half to 3/4 of a mark. The difference between the sort of dramatically stressed group and the moderately stressed group was closer to a full mark on the exam. So my point of all this is that if I had just gone into analysis like this and I assumed that as cortisol sort of linearly increased, anxiety also linearly increased, or stress, or whatever the case may be, I probably would have missed some fairly important relationships there. So, so this is an example. This is sort of a cautionary tale. This would suggest to me that when you're looking at sort of ideal levels of stress or anxiety prior to an exam, you should have a little bit of anxiety. It probably sort of ups your game just a little bit. If you're too flat, if you're too chill, or if you're too over the top stressed, neither one of those are probably great places to be. But again, this is just an illustration of how we need to really look at the distribution of our results, look at our data, and realize that, again, when we're dealing with humans, not everything is linear. All right.